New York City has long been a focal point for organized crime in the United States, and its ties to the Mafia, particularly the Italian-American Mafia, are among the most storied and infamous in criminal history. The city's Mafia history spans over a century and has seen the rise and fall of numerous powerful families, violent feuds, and a deep intertwining with the political and business world. The Mafia's influence in New York has had a lasting impact on both the city and the nation as a whole. This essay will explore the origins, evolution, and key figures of the Mafia in New York City, highlighting the notorious families and their influence on the city's criminal underworld. The roots of the Mafia in New York City can be traced back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a time when many Italian immigrants arrived in the United States, fleeing poverty, crime, and political unrest in their homeland. These immigrants, many of whom came from southern Italy and Sicily, brought with them a complex culture of crime rooted in the social structure of their home regions. This culture of organized crime, which later evolved into what is commonly known as the Mafia, was built around strong familial ties, loyalty, and an unwritten code of conduct known as omertà, a vow of silence. Upon arriving in New York, many Italian immigrants found themselves facing prejudice, poverty, and a lack of opportunities. As a result, some sought out protection, illegal employment, and means of survival by turning to criminal enterprises. In the early 20th century, the fledgling Italian-American criminal syndicates began to form in neighborhoods like Little Italy and Manhattan, and later expanded into other parts of the city, including Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. The rise of organized crime in New York coincided with the expansion of the city's economy and a number of social conditions that created fertile ground for the Mafia. During Prohibition, 1920 to 1933, when the sale of alcohol was banned, the Mafia found a lucrative opportunity in bootlegging and the illegal alcohol trade. With the help of corrupt politicians and law enforcement officials, Mafia families established monopolies on smuggling and distributing alcohol, thus solidifying their power and influence. The Five Families. By the 1930s, the Mafia in New York had solidified into 5 dominant families, each controlling a particular territory within the city. These families, known as the Five Families, have been central to the history of organized crime in New York. They are the Genovese family. Often considered the most powerful and influential of the 5 families, the Genovese family has maintained a low profile but remained involved in a wide range of illegal activities, including labor racketeering, extortion, and loan sharking. The family's power has been built around its ability to avoid detection and maintain unity within its ranks. The Gambino family. The Gambino family rose to prominence under the leadership of Carlo Gambino, who took control of the family in the 1950s. Under his leadership, the family grew into one of the most powerful mafia organizations in America. The Gambino family is perhaps most famous for the leadership of John Gotti, who became notorious for his bold actions, media presence, and eventual conviction for murder and racketeering. The Lucchese family. Known for their involvement in a wide range of criminal enterprises, the Lucchese family earned their reputation through their connections to labor unions, particularly in the garment and trucking industries. Their involvement in these industries provided them with both wealth and influence, making them key players in New York's underworld. The Bonanno family. The Bonanno family was one of the first mafia organizations to establish a presence in New York, but it has been plagued by internal strife and power struggles throughout its history. The most famous episode in the Bonanno family's history was the so-called Banana Wars, which saw a violent power struggle within the family during the 1960s. The Colombo family. The Colombo family has a history of violent internal conflict, and their leadership has often been contested. Founded by Joseph Colombo in the 1920s, the family was known for its involvement in labor racketeering, extortion, and the drug trade. The family's violence escalated during the 1970s, culminating in a series of bloody disputes and leadership shifts. These 5 families, each with its own leaders, traditions, and methods of operation, would shape the criminal landscape of New York City for decades. The family's involvement in various illegal enterprises, including drug trafficking, prostitution, labor racketeering, and murder, would also fuel intense competition and violent conflicts, not only between the families themselves, but also with rival groups, such as the Jewish and Irish-American gangs that once thrived in the city. The period of Prohibition, 1920 to 1933, was a critical time for the Mafia in New York City. With the nationwide ban on alcohol, organized crime families found a massive new source of revenue in bootlegging. The five families expanded their operations dramatically during this time, with each of them seeking to control various aspects of the illegal alcohol trade. The Mafia's influence reached its peak during this era, with figures like Charles Lucky, Luciano, Meyer Lansky, and Frank Costello becoming central figures in the city's criminal world. Luciano, in particular, was instrumental in modernizing the Mafia and creating the framework that would allow the five families to coexist and cooperate. He was also responsible for establishing the National Crime Syndicate, a coalition of crime families from across the United States. The Mafia's golden age continued through the 1930s and 1940s, even as law enforcement and government agencies, such as the FBI, began to ramp up their efforts to investigate and prosecute organized crime. The Mafia's connections with politicians, labor unions, and law enforcement helped them maintain their hold on power, but they also sowed the seeds for their eventual downfall. While the Mafia in New York reached its zenith during the mid-20th century, the latter part of the century saw a steady decline in its power and influence. A combination of law enforcement crackdowns, technological advancements in surveillance, and increased cooperation from informants led to a series of high-profile convictions and a weakening of the Mafia's grip on New York. The infamous commission trial of the 1980s was a significant blow to the Mafia's dominance. In 1986, following a massive investigation, key figures from the five families were convicted, including Mafia bosses such as Paul Castellano of the Gambino family and his successor, John Gotti. Gotti's conviction in the 1990s, after he had been acquitted several times due to witness intimidation, marked the end of an era for the Gambino family and signaled the collapse of the Mafia's once untouchable dominance. The use of wiretaps, surveillance technology, and the growing willingness of Mafia insiders to cooperate with law enforcement further decimated the Mafia's power in the 1990s and 2000s. The infamous FBI cases like the Donnie Brasco operation, which infiltrated the Bonanno family, and the prosecution of mobsters like John Gotti Jr. and Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano exposed the internal rot within the Mafia and hastened its decline. The Mafia's role in New York City's history is one of complexity and contradiction. For decades, it was a powerful force within the city's criminal underworld, shaping the city's economy and political landscape through racketeering, violence, and corruption. The Mafia's golden age, especially during Prohibition, cemented its place in popular culture, and figures like John Gotti and Lucky Luciano became infamous symbols of organized crime. However, the evolution of law enforcement and the increasing use of technology ultimately weakened the Mafia's grip on the city. Today, while organized crime still exists in New York City, the Mafia no longer holds the dominance it once did. The families that once ruled the city with an iron fist have been significantly diminished by legal pressures and the changing nature of crime. Despite this, the legacy of the Mafia remains an indelible part of New York's history, and its influence continues to resonate in the myths and legends of the city's underworld.